Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's about 55 here, so Thomas Jefferson is happy. There's no wind to speak of. It's a little overcast, but it's late in the day, so the light is failing us anyhow. The situation with Rudy Giuliani suggests that he doesn't have the money to pay, and I don't know what fraction of money that he does have will ever be paid to the two women that he defamed and hurt so grievously. The situation with Rudy, now moving on to Georgia, is how does he get counsel? He doesn't have any money for counsel. So he may ask the court to appoint counsel, although I'm not sure his ego would allow that. There have been spectacular examples of people representing themselves, but Rudy has not shown of late that he has those skills. Clarence Darrow ended up defending himself in connection with an alleged bribery in California, and he got an acquittal. And Roy Cohn, who is a favorite of Trump, also represented himself in the Southern District of New York, and he got acquittals for himself. So it can be done, but I don't think Rudy is the guy to do it. I have no sympathy for the punishment and suffering that he's going through, given what he's caused others. And as, or more importantly, is the question of, have we finally given an accounting by this civil judgment to those who think they can do anything? And I think it's very helpful in that regard, that the system may be adjusting itself, and it's kind of interesting that it seems to be adjusting itself in the civil arena before it's going to move on to the criminal arena. And I'm not taking anything away from the fact of the indictments and the pre-trial proceedings that have gone on, but it's very strong stuff. Both the civil case against Rudy and the civil case by the AG in New York against Trump. Cut them off at the knees, take away their funding, humiliate them, but we're humiliating them for things they did. And we've had this problem in America in which, including Rudy and Trump, they have been treated differently. They're not equal before the law. You or I, or most of us who are exchanging comments over this discussion right now, we would never get this kind of treatment. If we spoke like both of them have spoken, we would have been in custody, at least overnight, and we would have been fined. And maybe Rudy can't pay it, and when Trump is cutting up his clothes as relics, he can't either. But I have a special issue today, and it relates to the environment. But I have to start with a reference to art. I don't know how many of you have seen this extraordinary sculpture by Degas of a 14-year-old dancer. I first saw this statue when I was young in New York at the Metropolitan. And it's a bronze casting of the original, or another one, by Degas. And the other one, if you will, is at the National Gallery in D.C. And I've seen both of them over the years. So how would you feel, and I don't know if you have any affection or any knowledge of it, and I'll try to include a picture of it, at least on Twitter, or X as it's called. Excuse me, I should be better trained than that. How would you feel about somebody vandalizing that work of art? And so when I read the story about how there had been a desecration, or they didn't use that word, of the statue, it wasn't of the statue, because the statue is contained in a plastic see-through box that's carefully lit. And one of the reasons I suspect is because the original in 1881, the skirt of the 14-year-old ballerina is made of cloth. Okay, so why is this relevant now? It's because Joanna Smith and Tim Martin chose that statue as a point of protest. Protest about our leaders making decisions antithetical to life, health, and security. We're talking about global warming. How do we get people to care to do anything about it? So what did they do? They took black and red ink and they put their hands on the encasement of the statue, not the statue itself. As it turns out, they love art and respect it. So they found this way to have a protest about something that people might care about, and therefore bring up their consciousness of what the effect is. Now, this is an act of civil disobedience. And the way government handles civil disobedience, in my opinion, is to overreact. We talk about free speech, but it's a prepositional freedom. And you've heard me say this before, perhaps. You have freedom of speech. You don't always have freedom after speech. And so this is speech plus conduct, but not like the kind of conduct we're talking about when people talk about blowing up buildings and so forth. This goes back to early America when civil disobedience was examined, and members of the Supreme Court have written about it, particularly in the 60s when we had the Vietnam War. But let's talk about this a little bit. What does the government want? Well, it wants a pound of flesh. They claim it costs $2,400 in damage. Now, I don't know if that's what the plastic case cost to replace or to clean it or what, but it's entirely property damage for them. The government doesn't say anything about global warming or what we're doing to each other, how we're hurting each other. And one of the pair, Ms. Smith, she entered a plea of guilty. But Tim Martin has not done so, intends to go to trial. And one of the reasons is he wants to, by going to trial, get at that death cult of fossil fuels that seems to travel inexorably toward ever-increasing opportunities for us to suffer globally, because these guys just want to make money, and until they've emptied the earth of every element of fossil fuel, they will not be satisfied. So that's that. Now what do we have as an example of this? Well, when I was younger, there was a Jesuit, Daniel Berrigan, and he was a Jesuit. I joke that the Jesuits teach you how to use your mind, and then they're terrified when you do. And there's no mistake in my mind that there was a big difference between my grammar school education and my high school education. And I had some Jesuits at Fordham before I transferred to Columbia as part of a program. So I know something about the Jesuits. But Daniel Berrigan had a big heart, and unlike some misguided religious these days, he thought it should matter when we were fighting a war. And he did bring back some prisoners from Vietnam, but more importantly, he thought it was part of his role to find a way to protest those who are about to go to Vietnam. And so he convinced his younger brother Phil to join together to go to a draft station in Maryland, to go in and take the files of those men who were going to be sent to Vietnam and destroy them. That was their objection to a war. They were prosecuted for a property crime as well. And they went to trial, and you can get your hands on the transcripts and so forth. And they used the trial to put on a defense of what they had done. And so I suspect that that's what's going to happen with this protest to remedy global warming. And the gentleman who would go to trial said what he's really doing is, as the statue is of a 14-year-old, so he is concerned about his own children. So for him, this is a commitment of family, of good sense, of science, and of the preservation of the world against the death cult that is immersed in fossil fuels. So let's go back to Daniel Berrigan. Daniel Berrigan went to trial, and he was convicted. He got a sentence of 2 to 3 months. I forget what the individual charges were, but again, it was property crime. There was no discussion by the government that this was a protest. And then what he did was he fled. And his theory of fleeing was that he would keep alive the issue by doing that. So, like I said, their minds, watch those Jesuit minds. I happen to think everything he did was proper. Some said he should have stayed to serve the time, and ultimately they caught up with him, and he served 2 months. He died, he's 93 years of age when he died. His younger brother Phil died younger, had cancer. I think it's 79 actually. So what can we glean from this? I think what we can glean from this is that the more unresponsive our government is, as now, treating some people different than others, say like the corporations, that we can expect to see more instances of civil disobedience. Now, instances of civil disobedience that would preserve life, it seems to me, are important. And one can choose one's poison, but I consider myself, if not demonstrating these days in an act of civil disobedience, I can see that those who are prepared to commit the crime, the property crime, to make the point that we have to do something better. Now, it's a slippery slope when you have to resort to civil disobedience, because where does that end? Civil disobedience is supposedly against the law that exists, So we have to keep that in mind when we're sanctioning it. And there were members of the Supreme Court back in the 60s that talked about how do you do civil disobedience. And the answer is it's not always pleasant. And it shows an illness in the government in the sense that the government is not responding, not representing the will of the people, is representing a narrow group of people, whether it be warmongers or earth destroyers. And I don't think that's too strong an expression that popped into my head as I said it. The bottom line is we now are in contention between a government that is flawed and been compromised in the last, 6 years at least. And how do we get back to the republic? Well, punishing Rudy and Trump by cutting off the lifeline to the money that they don't deserve because either they defamed someone or they made misrepresentations to make even more profits and to avoid tax obligations. And we're moving toward trials that are being resisted within the strength and power of these offenders of our democracy. And we will see some demonstrations if we can't keep this train on track. And the failure of COP28 to actually assure us that anything will really happen opens us up to demonstrations like happened at the museum. So Degas' sculpture serves us not just as art, but in protest of what some would do to the planet without regard to the well-being of you or I. So that's what I got to say. I walked a different way today, so I don't have so many trees around me. And I have to go back to my writing when I finish this sojourn in the area. So thanks for listening. I look forward to talking to you tomorrow. My papers are due on Monday, and I hope I'm taking off Tuesday, because this has been a little bit of a grind. I welcome the challenge, but it's hard. I'm trying to overturn a conviction that never should have happened. And it's a long story, and it's not fair to my client to discuss it too much, but that's what I'm working on through Monday, probably close to midnight. Bye-bye.